Marvel's Spider-Man 2 on Steam Deck, so what to say about this game? I've been playing it on multiple PC configurations. My first impressions were good, but after playing the game more, things got worse and worse. When it comes to deck compatibility, we have nothing. They're still investigating, which makes me happy they didn't go from the get-go put in a verification because the game launches, so that's good. Alright, so when it comes to the settings, I chose 1152 by 720 on the display resolution instead of 800p. This is because it's still 16 by 10, so you use the entire screen. And you can control the sharpness outside of the game using the FSR sharpness option. This one is pretty aggressive sharpening, but I think it works pretty well. So you have more control over it, apart from the one in-game. When it comes to HDR, I highly recommend you turn it off for the Steam Deck OLED. But the colors are not saturated enough. It looks less colorful, to say it in some way. Same happened with the original. Then when it comes to frame gen, I recommend disabling it. You'll see why later. XeSS as the upscaling method. There is no upscaling. IGTI, which is the one that is used on PS5. FSR 3.1.0 and XeSS. I think XeSS, at least in general, looks better in this game, especially when moving around. Less chunkiness to the pixels. There's also dynamic resolution. It works from 60 all the way down to 30. At the beginning, I'm not going to enable it, but let's get to the graphics. Basically, the lowest settings, excepting the shadows, the reflections, and ambient occlusion. I'm a bit conflicted with the level of geometry option. If you put it on low, many buildings will be super low resolution, obviously, but I don't know, the difference is just too large. I think it's too big of a sacrifice, but at the same time we're playing on a Steam Deck, so it makes sense. Hair quality, low or very low, mostly for cutscenes. Weather particle quality on low. Depth of field, not a big fan. Bloom enabled, no chromatic aberration and no vignette. FOV, I lowered it 10 degrees in order to get less stuff being rendered. So a 10-degree decrease. Since we're on a smaller screen, it shouldn't be a big loss. And I want to thank Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. They sell game keys that are from official resellers. They have 24/7 support and huge discounts on games. We got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for $40, Assetto Corsa Evo for $20, and it doesn't stop on PC games. You can also get Xbox games, PlayStation games, and Nintendo Switch games. Right now, there's also deals for games that are not out yet, such as Monster Hunter Wilds for $55, The Last of Us 2 Remastered for $41, and Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii for $50. Also, due to this partnership, we're doing a giveaway each month. So hit an orange button that says participate, and once you do, you can get extra chances to win by following Instant Gaming in social media, so I highly recommend you follow the links in the description. Get this game and more for cheaper, follow the link in the description to Instant Gaming, you get cheaper games and you support the channel at the same time with the affiliate links. So thanks again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Let's continue. Alright, so as usual, I'm going to show you multiple parts of the game. This part right here is when you play as man instead of Spider-Man. And on my PC, that I enable basically every option to the highest, I have a 4090. This part ran like absolute garbage. This part is super GPU bound, obviously. The GPU is maxed out, there are some stutters when moving the camera. Alright, so now we get combat in this place. So now on the ground we got many reflections, we got a good amount of NPCs, the civilians running out of the place, and a good amount of lights as well. So I think this is a decent test when it comes to the GPU at least. There is many things that you can test in this game, it's pretty large. But usually when I suffered the most was when using symbiote powers. You get them way later into the game, but you're going to be using them a lot, and that's when the performance suffers the most, especially when you're fighting other symbiotes. So that's why I'm using balanced XeSS. But as you can probably notice, we're hovering into the 30s with drops into the upper 20s, despite the resolution sacrifices we're doing. So again, that's something that I think you should keep in mind. Symbiote stuff shows up, we drop frames significantly, even with a lower resolution. So now like this, you get more symbiote powers on screen, which makes the frame rate suffer even more. So at the beginning I was talking about dynamic resolution, and this will greatly help us using dynamic res. The thing is, you're sacrificing clarity because it seems to have some overhead with the performance using dynamic resolution. That means that it will look more pixelated even in places where it shouldn't be. But we don't have much of a choice really. So again, my advice is to lock it to 30 and use dynamic res. Whether I like to say that or not, we don't have much of an option. At least for GPU related stuff, like this one. So let's get outside. Alright, now this other situation would be the open world. And here's when you get CPU limited. So the CPU is the limiting factor instead of the GPU. The GPU still gets crushed, don't get me wrong. But the CPU, when it's loading all the city while you're traversing, the faster you're going through the city, the more you're going to notice the CPU crying for help. So what you'll get as a result is stutters when you're traversing very, very quickly. In this case, we're not going that fast for what the game can offer in later parts. But as you can see, there are moments where it drops very hard into the upper 30s. Like, it feels like a big slowdown, which again, makes sense. We're loading the city as we go. But it's less of an obvious thing if you look into 30 FPS, that's what I'm trying to say, I'll show you that in a moment. And now for a more open world stress test. We are basically Bolly McGuire. As you can see, there's a few shadow casting lights. The light sources there cast multiple shadows, which makes it more demanding at night, like the original. We also have rain going on, so I went all out in finding a place that can challenge the GPU and the CPU. So that's it. This is it when it comes to that. We also have symbiote powers, so that makes it even harder for the GPU. This is kind of a open world worst case scenario. We have to load all that, and at the same time the GPU has to render the symbiote stuff. So we're going to try that out. But as you go quicker and quicker and quicker, the CPU is going to suffer and more and more and more for some intense combat. So there is trees, there are symbiote powers, and as you can see here, it's like I showed you before, the GPU starts crying. So the CPU does less work here because we're standing in a small area. So we're not loading the rest of the open world very quickly, like in Traversal. But we're getting those trees, those effects, and well, that makes it suffer. That's why, again, 30 FPS lock is the best way to do it, at least in my opinion. And before I show you what it looks like on the hands, because here on a capture card, it won't look as good because we're on a 7-inch screen, actually. So the resolution will always look pretty low, which, again, that's the truth, the resolution is pretty damn low. But we're playing a handheld, so sacrifices need to be made. But again, here's when it drops like that. That's the CPU just loading stuff in. So there's not much that we can do about it, honestly. But now that I showed you that, let's go to Times Square. So when you open the map, there's lots of geometry. So when moving around the map, you get drops below 20 FPS. I don't think this is a huge deal, it's just a map, whatever. But you can notice it. So what I wanted to show you is fast travel. So let's go right in the middle here. And fast travel is super quick. So we're on the other corner of the map. And there we go. The fast travel is basically instant. If you're on a micro SD card, I don't even want to know how slow it will be. But here we are in Times Square. Usually when there is the most amount of people and cars at night, that lots of lights cast shadows. So there we go, the street lights cast shadows, the cars do as well. And there is, well, and it's raining, which makes it harder for the GPU because we have reflections on the ground. But so far so good, this part at least. The thing is when you're traversing very quickly. And well, despite the very low resolution, I'm now locked to 30 FPS. I think on the smaller screen it looks good enough. Considering again we're talking about a PS5 game, this game is not on PS4. But in the open world, as you're traversing around, the CPU is still going to suffer. Now I, on purpose, got into a fight with symbiotes, which again hits the GPU quite a bit. And these people don't seem to care that there is symbiotes attacking people, but that's okay. But again, when symbiote stuff shows up, it drops below 30 FPS, and we're in the middle of combat, so that's a no-no, at least in my book. So while we have a symbiote on screen, let's put it at dynamic resolution, which again, it has a cost, so it'll look more pixelated. But I think in this case is worth doing. So at 30 FPS dynamic resolution, so it changes the resolution to stick to 30 FPS. We apply the changes. We're using XeSS because I think it looks the best after FSR3. FSR3 looks a little bit too chunky in my opinion. Alright, so now with dynamic resolution, the game looks a bit more pixelated, but in moments like these, when we are GPU limited, again, symbiotes on screen, and I died, I think. Okay, so I wasn't paying attention and I died. I'm locked to 30 FPS now with the 30 FPS dynamic resolution thing going on. And again, in traversal, we cannot do much because of the CPU. The CPU suffers quite a bit, but with the 30 FPS cap, it's not so bad. When the dynamic resolution will help us the most will be when basically we are GPU limited. Again, those symbiote fights, you'll have a lot of that later in the game, so I think it's super important that we focus on having the best experience when in combat. Because again, in combat, you need to have 30 FPS as consistently as possible. Otherwise it's kinda, what's the point, right? Like, okay, in a menu it's okay if in the map we're getting drops in performance, it's just a map. But when fighting, I think it's crucial to have a consistent 30 FPS. Especially later, again, with the symbiote stuff, it's going to be quite a hit to the GPU. So while it looks a bit more pixelated with dynamic resolution, again, I think it looks good enough on the smaller screen. You can probably notice that with the camera recording. Because with a capture card, direct capture on a big screen, it ain't going to look pretty. Definitely. Here we go. So this will be the first thing that you see when you play the game, for when it comes to combat. The sand people attacking you. And again, no matter what I did, even if I lower the shadows and the level of detail to very low instead of low, I still got these drops. And again, we're using dynamic resolution here, so the game cannot drop resolution enough to maintain us at 30 when in heavy combat like this. Once you get past the Sandman part, you're going to get a much more stable experience. But it's not a good look when you first play the game to see something like this, honestly. I mean, the fact that this is at the beginning of the game will make it more obvious. This is my guess why Valve doesn't have this to be verified as of yet, and they are not saying it's playable, they're not saying it's unsupported, because the game does work. But I mean, just look at this. That including the crashing and all that, just makes me think, okay, the game needs more work, especially since I play on a high-end PC and had lots of crashes and visual bugs. I think on the Steam Deck it's got potential if we can lower the quality of the particles. Otherwise, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it on Steam Deck, at least right now. If that changes, obviously, we're making another video. Considering it's a PS5 game, it kind of makes sense that it runs like that. Makes me think it probably needs lots of polishing when it comes to technical stuff. I'm not saying it'll make it playable on Steam Deck, but it will definitely help, that's for sure. But at the moment, especially again, when you're playing the game, this is one of the first things that you're going to notice. Outside of the Sandman fight and some of the symbiote stuff that you're going to find later in the game, it should be okay. Traversing, it works fine. But what about frame generation to close up this video? Well, the base frame rate is pretty damn low, so frame generation will have lots of input lag. But I'm going to do it anyway because you guys always ask for it and tell me to keep the GPU clock at 1600. So we're doing that and enabling frame generation. Frame rates more into the 50s. It looks smoother, but the responsiveness is not particularly great. I can feel the input lag. I think it's pretty obvious. And we got a higher GPU and CPU usage. If you don't mind playing it like this, that's fine. Maybe you couldn't get a refund if you play this already. If it's the only way you have to play the game, fine, I guess. But remember, frame gen is not only, oh, more FPS better, there's input lag. Where technically the real frame rate is into the 20s. Yeah, I mean, just look at that cutscene. Jesus Christ. Anyway guys, I think that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully they improved this PC port for Spider-Man 2. Mostly the crashing, I would say, should be their priority at the moment to improve on, especially on higher-end PCs. That has been my biggest issue with the PC port, apart from the visual stability. Had a lot of visual bugs on my PC. And sometimes on Steam Deck in cutscenes. But at the moment, again, I wouldn't recommend it. Just play Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man Miles Morales. They run significantly better with higher resolutions, and you don't get the input lag from frame generation. So yeah, just due to the fact of the higher resolution on the Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales, I recommend those over this one. I'll wait for this one to get more patches and we'll retry it, but at the moment, there's no way I can recommend it in this state. And frame gen, I can feel the input lag. I mean, again, base frame rate 20 something FPS in this part. Gets better outside of the Sandman and symbiote parts, but the symbiote parts are a big part of the game, so I think that's important. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see ya next time. Bye guys.